Hey everyone, it's Internet Pleb here. Welcome to episode 1 of this League of Legends guide. So, this is the first episode where I'll be covering how you should approach general decision making in this game and some very basic ideas that you should know while you're playing the game. So, this is by no means the entirety of this series, it's just an introduction before you watch the other episodes of this guide, which will contain an episode for each role in the game, which will be published later on. For this video, and the series to make sense to you, you're required to roughly understand what all champions do in the game. So this means you should know basically what all their skills and passives do. You don't necessarily have needed to play them, just to know what their skills do. If you have not reached this stage yet, then I strongly recommend that you get a rough idea of this before you watch or try to understand anything that I say in this video, because I feel like it would be a bit too confusing. This video will be divided into 4 categories. The first one being the Yasuo problem, the second one being the basics and the importance of team communication. Third one is the mentality of how you should approach your games, and the fourth one is the question of how do I get better. So this should cover everything you need to know about the game, outside of the gameplay itself. The other episodes of this guide will be built on top of these 4 things, so it is very important that you understand all 4 parts very clearly. To summarize each category, they are as follows. The Yasuo problem is an example I go back to often, which shows the ultimate decision-making pathway in this game, regardless to whether or not it's big or small. The basics and importance of team communication focuses on how and why using pings and the chat function effectively can lead to frequent positive results. The mentality of the game aims to cover what you should be thinking before, during, and after each game in order to maximize how much you learn from it and how well you perform. If there is anyone that tilts or flames hard, then this is a must-watch for you. How do I get better covers everything you can do to answer this question of how do I get better. Before we move on to the first part, there are 2 key terms that I need to define in order for this to make more sense. The term micro refers to champion-specific movement on the second scale. For example, dodging a skill shot, how to use a skill efficiently, or what combo to use would be all under micro. Now, macro refers to champion-independent movement. So, in terms of the minute scale, big decision making. Which objective should we get next? Where do I split push? What lane do I go to farm? Where do I ward? Etc. So without further ado, let's get into part 1. Part 1, the Yasuo problem. So for those of you that have watched my stream before, you may already know what the Yasuo problem is, because I use it quite often when I'm talking to people, and I refer back to it quite a bit. So for those of you that don't know, I'll give a bit of background. So I consider Yasuo to be the perfect champion for this example, not because of what his skills are or his play style, but rather because if you look at most low elo divisions, you have one tricks that main Yasuo, quite a number of them. It's probably because Yasuo's personality and skills are really edgy, and it kind of attracts players that are not so good at the game. So this example starts with the following image. So you have Yasuo in the mid lane, quite ordinary situation with him flashing the Mastery 7 emote. So we're going to make this a bit more interesting. We're going to add some champions to this image so that we can entertain a hypothetical here, so we can get to a point. So let's say we use 6 champions in this example. We're going to have Evelynn, Karma, and Sivir on our team, and we're going to have Lee Sin, Kog'Maw, and Lulu on the enemy team. Keep that in mind that they are not on the same team, they're different teams. Now let's make some assumptions about the champions on this map. We are going to assume that Evelyn and Lee Sin are about to engage in a fight, and we know this is fact, hypothetically. Now let's assume the exact same thing between Karma Sivir and Lulu Kog'Maw. Now, we can assign some probabilities to each of these cases. Let's also assume, hypothetically, that we know that the chance that each side wins in both fights is 50%, as illustrated. For this problem, let's also ignore top lane completely and say that the enemy mid laner is known to be in the fountain of his base at the moment. So now comes the question, what should you as the Yasuo do? To engage completely with this idea, and to understand it more fully, I'll give you 20 seconds to answer. You should think very hard not only about what you would do, but why. Try to justify it, and if you can't, then try think of a better answer. If you need more than 20 seconds, feel free to pause the video. This is a question I ask nearly anyone I do one-to-one coaching with, and the most common response I get is to attend to the fight on the bottom side of the map. When asked why, I would either get a response of, I don't know, or if we kill them, we get 2 kills and a dragon. The less common answer is to attend to the fight at the top of the map, and the reason that I usually hear is because it's easier to outnumber one person rather than 2 people. So out of the hundreds of people that I've asked this specific example to, I've only had about 3 people that gave me the correct answer. So the correct answer would be to push mid lane and then attend to the fight that is most likely going to win with or without you being there. If you answered this, then that's great. You've got the first bit right, but if your decision making as to why this is the case was incorrect, then you should rethink and reconsider why you thought that. As with everything, this has to be justified. So to break this problem down a bit further, the situation has you consider 3 main options, all of which seem fairly reasonable on paper, without doing some thinking. So this is an error that a lot of people make in this game, which is that they make the decision based on how it looks, based off of some very clouded judgment and clouded experience that they may or may not have. So to break this problem down a bit further, we are going to assign a probability to the option that we considered last, which is to push mid lane. So considering we know that the enemy mid laner is in his base right now, we should be able to take the farm 100% of the time. There shouldn't be any interference from anyone, since all of the champions in the image are about to engage in a fight anyways. They probably won't be attending to you. So here is where the big issue lies with attending to either fight first. In the not so unlikely case that you either walk away with nothing because the enemies have escaped, or you die, you have effectively netted yourself 0 gold in a 30-second to 1-minute time frame. If you did clear the wave, then attended to any fight still ongoing, you would have nullified 2 problems when compared to doing this initially. Firstly, you get a better judgment as to which fight can be more easily won, because time has passed for the fight to evolve into a more clear conclusion. Secondly, in this same time frame, you have by default netted yourself not only 120-ish gold, but some EXP as well. This means that losing the exchange that you attended to after clearing the wave is not as bad anymore, as you're allowed to reset without having lost as much. Now this problem is obviously an extremely specific case, but the overall decision making is the same regardless for what you are doing. This means scrap thinking in absolute numbers. For example, I can get 100 gold if I kill him. We can get Baron if we fight. The issue with this style of thinking is you have no consideration for how likely this outcome is. If an outcome that you don't favor is more likely, why would you do it? But if you're not considering it, you never get to that conclusion. This idea boils down to making a decision not based on the amount of gold or the amount of advantage you would get from making a play and succeeding at that play, but rather taking the play that instead has the highest probability to net you any amount of gold. Something I like to draw a comparison to when looking at decisions like this is thinking of all the decisions in your game as a dice roll, and you're trying to roll a certain range of numbers for a positive outcome. So for example, rolling a 6-sided die and getting anywhere between 1 to 5 is about an 83.3% chance. Those are pretty good odds. If you net yourself a significant amount of gold, then that would obviously be the play to take. Now, if you mirror this with making another decision which seems much harder, for example, you might be engaging in a 1v2, or you might be 1v1ing a Fed member on their team, you could think of the die as expanding, but not the numbers that you're looking for. So instead of having a 6-sided die and looking for outcomes 1 through 5, you would now be rolling a 10-sided die and still be going from 1 through 5. Now on the 10-sided die, the difference is that the chance that you get anywhere between 1 to 5 has dropped to 50% and can now be considered a dangerous roll. So this is what you should ask yourself whether or not you're going for this play. Essentially, don't confuse yourself by thinking about what you can get, but think about what you could potentially lose. And always remember that everything in this game is a probability of success and failure. Even the smallest things, like putting a ward down, backing to base, getting one farm, everything. The overall decision making should center around this idea that you take the highest probability plays first, and then you look for the ones that are smaller. So again, we're completely discounting how much gold you get from each one, because that is not how you get a consistent lead. A lot of people that come to me and talk to me seem to have 50% win rates at the lower elos. So for example, 50% win rate at silver is not something very uncommon. And the reason for that is because in every single game that they play, if all they do is make decisions that are 50-50 on the outcome of succeeding or failing, then every single game they play will be made up of small 50-50s. And that means that on average, the chance that they win one game is 50%, and that translates to all the rest of the games that they play, which is also 50%. This is because both teams fighting have equal skill level, and obviously most probably have equal items as well, which leads to 50%. Now this is also why games in higher elos, such as both Masters and Challenger ranks, tend to have games which end in much lower kill scores for both sides than in low elo games. In low elo games, it would be pretty normal to see a game end with a kill score of 45 to 30, whereas in the more higher elos that would be very, very rare, and instead it would be something like 15 to 20, maximum it goes up to is maybe 30. Now this applies much more extremely in Korea because they are the more superior region at the moment, at least, and this is because fighting and getting an advantage through kills tends to be very inconsistent, and that is kind of why higher elo players tend to not go for kills as much as low elo players, which should show that low elo players should not be doing what they're doing now. Now all of this is not to say that you should be ending games at a score of 0, 0, and 0. that's not necessarily how the game is made. You can't really do that successfully. But it's rather to hold off on attempting to get kills until the other smaller gold leads, but much higher probability decisions have been fulfilled. I promise you, if you're playing like this, you will still end games with kills, with a lot, in fact, sometimes. Because the situation to kill someone will very obviously present itself to you. Wait for the opponents to make a mistake, not for you to make a play and expect it to go perfectly to the point where you cannot be punished for it. Part 2. Basics and importance of team communication. One of the most common questions I get is, what can I do if my team does not want to listen to me? This part covers this issue and what we can do to work around this problem. So firstly, we need to establish something very important about this game. Under no circumstance will you get a long streak of games where the people on your team will actively listen to you and do exactly as you say. It would be very flawed to assume that there exists something you can do to make everyone in all of your games listen to you. Unfortunately, this means that you do lose some games to miscommunication and people not wanting to listen to you. The point of this part is to explain how to approach this problem and what to do to minimize its effect. One common mistake I see when people try to communicate with their teammates is the use of only one channel of communication. Some people will claim they have communicated what they want their teammates to do, but will only use either pings or just a chat to do so. While the intention at times may be clear, it is harder for a person to take notice and act quickly upon information they have only received through one source, such as only pings or only chat messages. For more quick reactions from your teammates, pings and the chat function need to be used in conjunction to each other to increase the effectiveness of what you're trying to tell them. They should always go hand in hand, so don't treat them as their own way of communicating. Another reason why people ignore calls or simply don't act upon them voluntarily is because they oftentimes don't care and don't have a reason to. Let's put it this way. If you're in a game with 4 other people, let's say you're playing Yorick top, and your score is 1-1. You require your team to not fight in order for you to get a split push priority and advantage. If all you've been doing this entire game is laning without considering anyone else to exist on your team will have no reason to care about what you say. The first message you typed was at 20-something minutes, and it might even disagree with what they think the win condition might be. So to work around this, in every single game you play, you must be communicating at all times in the game. If you feel you don't have anything to say, even things like enemy war timings, summoner spells, what objectives you should be looking for, anything. This should gradually show your team that you have the best intentions of winning the game on your team. Whatever you have said so far, after all, contributes even slightly towards winning the game. This increases the likelihood of them listening to you throughout the course of the game, and doing so actually tackles another issue, which is that you have many games that result in multiple options being voiced and acted upon at the exact same time. This would obviously lead to more messy and uncoordinated gameplay, as you would have 2 people saying 2 different things. You don't really know which one to follow. If you type much more than your teammates, chances are all of them will listen to anything you might want to add. This means that you can control your team as one person, meaning you would have much more coordinated team play rather than a messy amalgamation of ideas that might or might not work out. Now keep in mind, whenever I'm referring to pings throughout this part, I mean spam pinging. If you really want people to pay attention, use the chat box and spam ping for anything that you want your team to do. Ping until you can't anymore because the system restricts you to. The reason communication is so important is because it can be the reason for you to win or lose a game. It can be the difference between a win or a loss quite a lot of times, actually. You holding the entirety of your team together can make it so much more coordinated and easy to execute. Communicating effectively takes practice, but that's something you can only get right by trying and failing the first few times, as long as you keep trying and getting better at it. Part 3. Mentality and how to approach your games. Firstly, this goes without saying, hopefully, but in every single game of League you will play, there will be people that make mistakes, be it on your team, the enemy team, or both. Now, this does not discount you, obviously. You'll make plenty of mistakes too in every game you play. This should be enough of a justification to not flame people that make mistakes, because you are equal to them. Everyone has bad games. In case some of you need even more reason to not flame or troll, they are more likely to have a decreased performance, resulting in a more likely loss for your team, and they are more likely to troll themselves as well, automatically losing you the game if that does happen. Now, I don't like it when trolls and flamers come to me and they tell me that their win rates are not high enough or that they're playing badly, because you can easily put on a solid 5% onto your win rate by just not flaming or trolling. Secondly, you should treat League of Legends like maths. Practice makes perfect is oftentimes used to show how important practice is in anything you do in life. While the core idea of this statement is something that I can completely agree with, it fails to address something that a lot of people disregard. As a result of this, I usually stick to the quote, "The right practice makes perfect." Similarly to maths, playing games endlessly without any breaks in between or any revision of your mistakes leads to no improvement. You're just not taking your mistakes to heart, it's just random filler. This gives us a few ideas that we need to find a solution to. Before your games, you should always be prepared for them, meaning you should not be tired, be in a bad mood, be hungry, thirsty, etc. It is essential that you're in the right state of mind for every single game you play, increasing the odds of concentrating more and learning more at the same time. During your games, you should always assume that you are better than your teammates in terms of who makes the better decisions. This forces you to come up with actual decisions, and communicating it to your team will result in more likely wins. You should not under any situation assume that you do not make mistakes. Everyone does at the end of the day. It would be one of the biggest misconceptions you can have of the game. Play as if you were the shot caller to a team you and your friends are in, assuming you know most about the game. If people don't do as you're saying, assume it's not their fault, and that it's yours instead. For example, if you're playing mid and the enemy mid laner is missing, pinging missing on your lane is often not enough. If your teammate did not notice that the enemy mid laner is approaching his lane, that is on you. You should have either spammed more pings, typed it in chat, or pinged danger on his lane to let him know that the enemy is approaching in that direction. If you treat your teammates in this way, whereby you're careful to not have the slightest chance they miss a ping or a call, they will treat you the same way and listen to what you have to say. After your games, you should not immediately queue into another game, just wait. Do some push-ups, go for a short walk, drink some water, anything. The after your games section is tied much more nicely to the last part of this episode. Part 4. How do I get better? Here we are, it's the ultimate question. I hope there aren't any people that skip straight to this section without looking at the previous 3, because I believe it is extremely important to use these 4 parts in conjunction with one another, as this section alone will not actually make you get better as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Like I said in the previous part, treat this game like maths in school. The right practice makes perfect. 20% of this game is knowing what to do, while the other 80% is executing it over and over again until you do it perfectly each time. I can build you the staircase to the right place, but you will have to climb it, as I like to say. To help shorten the length of this staircase, there are a few things you can do. Firstly, play one champion, and only one champion when climbing or trying to learn the game. There should be no exceptions to this. This rule is fundamental as it tackles one of the most basic problems anyone can have, which is that they can't focus on the basic macro of the game because they don't have full mastery of controlling their champion. Controlling your champion very well is important to being able to focus on the macro of the game. Otherwise, you would be rethinking things like, how do I use my abilities in your games, instead of looking at anything else. This is important, obviously, because the game is 10% micro and 90% macro knowledge at the moment, which I would say was the opposite maybe 5 years ago. Once you've mastered your champion, focusing on the macro is much, much easier, because you can put your attention to it by playing a champion you know very well. Now, I wouldn't say there's a set of champions you should necessarily play for this. It could be anything, as long as you have fun playing that champion. Some champions take longer to learn, keep that in mind, but if you are having fun, that should be no issue, because, well, you're having fun. No matter how many games you play, you would always still be okay with it. I recommend everyone check out, in my opinion, one of the most useful League YouTube channels. It's called Domisum Replay. I'll link it in the description. This is a channel with thousands of replays of high elo games on any champion you might want to main. If you decide you want to main Zed, for example, you should check out a few of the Zed replays before you go more deeply into the gameplay, and watch how good players handle the champion. Pay attention to the trade patterns, pay attention to the combos they use, pay attention to the positions that they're in. Anything that will help you get closer to mastery of that champion is fine. Something else that's important to do if you want to improve is you should make a spreadsheet for yourself, but make it champion specific. The purpose of the spreadsheet is not to do what your match history does already. It's to serve as a forceful method of getting you to focus on what mistakes you made in your games. The spreadsheet should have 5 columns, as shown. The date, the matchup, whether or not you win or lost, your KDA, with, importantly, your farm per minute, and, most importantly, a notes section. The first 4 are pretty straightforward. You probably already know how to fill these in. The notes section exists for you to write absolutely anything you want to do with the game, which you think will improve the next game you play. Think of the good and the bad. If you did something incorrectly, what should you have done instead? Did you mess something up in laning phase? Why did you do that? What can you do about it next time? This forces you to think about the game you just played, internalizing everything you just did, and it also keeps a good log of what just happened that you can refer back to anytime should you get the same matchup again. If you feel like you don't know what you should have done, that's perfectly fine. A lot of people get that. Write what you think you should have done, even if it's not necessarily correct. If it isn't, you will notice it in the next game you play when you try what you wrote down out. It doesn't have to be correct all the time. It all revolves around practice, trial, error, and patience. To conclude, this is intended to be a video where you would use all the parts of it in conjunction with one another. I do not recommend you watch one part and walk away thinking that was good enough. Okay guys, so I hope you enjoyed the first episode. The next episode released will be a jungle guide, so specifically focusing only on jungle and everything to do with the role. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if this has helped out in any way, or if you feel like there is something I might have missed. Please do let me know as well. I would love to hear any comments on it. See you in the next one. Peace.